This is the RIN RPG, and this is the cover page. These are all drafts, but this is more or less what it will look like. And it's just supposed to look like a beautiful gilded magical tome. And on the interior is just the RIN logo. This game is dedicated to Panagia Theotokos and Saints Noah, Solomon, Andrew the Fool for Christ, and Catherine the Great Martyr. Thank you to my playtesters, James, David, Trey, Isaiah, Caleb, Samuel, and Ariana. RIN has been inspired thematically and tonally by Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, Heroes of Might and Magic 2, the Baldur's Gate series, Daggerfall, Star Trail, and the action-adventure genre. Generally, AD&D 2nd Edition for its vibrant settings and tone. Heroes of Might and Magic, particularly the second game because of its vibrant art and its very fairy tale-like medieval fantasy world that it evokes. Baldur's Gate series really is an extension of 2nd Edition AD&D, but just again the tone of those games fits what I had in mind for RIN, particularly the combat and the way it operates. Daggerfall, just the tone of the combat, not the details of the system, but just the if you go to Privateer's Hold and the fights in there, they're just 1 or 2 hits, quick, fun action. Fits that very well. Star Trail, the class importance, how important the classes play differently and are essential, and the game plays very differently and it needs certain classes that fulfill certain roles very strongly, the strong archetypes. And then just the action-adventure genre in general, and movies and fantasy and such. The art is mostly AI generated and inspired by the works of Frank Frazetta, Alphonse Mucha, and Errol Otis, and then moving on to the system. This is the first page to talk about the RIN system. RIN is a fantasy role-playing game. It is fantasy in the world in which it takes place is fictitious, imaginative, and filled with extraordinary persons, creatures, places, and events. It is role-playing in that its gameplay consists of players crafting and assuming the roles of characters. I guess I don't have to read all this, but it's essential. If you know RPGs, you kind of know what they are. The description: there are many role-playing games in existence. Each has its own approach to the genre. RIN is best described as a pulp high fantasy action role-playing game, and here are the elements distinctive to it. RIN focuses heavily on classical fantasy archetypes, since working out of these archetypes promotes interesting interaction between players, as the strengths and limitations of their characters serve to enable meaningful narrative and strategy. Archetypes are very good for role-playing. It's kind of like taking on a role and a character. When you have limitations, you have certain strengths. It adds to the make it interesting. RIN also emphasizes immersion and story by tying description into mechanics, prescribing simple, intuitive resolutions, and promoting a tone of fantastic action adventure. So the actual mechanics, the theme of the class is tied into the mechanics. I can kind of give an example of like the 3rd edition barbarian, where the barbarian is this loincloth clad, he's got a helmet and a loincloth and a big axe. But if you look at 3rd edition D&D, he's heavily armored, cloak of protection, rings of protection, all these extraneous things that don't really, the mechanics don't fit the concept of the class, at least not in the standard archetypical sense. So in RIN, that's not the case. The barbarian is just in a loincloth with an axe, and he functions well, and it's tied into the theme of the class. It also prescribes simple, intuitive resolutions. I started making RIN many years ago. I've been doing it off and on really for 20 years, and I really was a response to 3rd edition and just some of the rule-heavy stuff that you could go on about. But just if you just look at the grappling rules, trying to kick someone out of a window, very intense, and you could read through them. It's kind of one of the worst parts of that system. But in RIN, just make a check. You either kick them out or you don't. Very simple. That's kind of one example. And then promoting a tone of fantastic action adventure. That's pretty broad, but you can see in how it works as you get to know the classes and the function. It pretty much elicits that kind of tone. RIN uses all the standard dice from D4s to D100s, but it uses the D10 as its core mechanic. By far, the D10 is the most often used. The D100 is also used quite a bit in character creation, and then the D4s to the D12s are used primarily for damage calculation. So there are 16 classes in RIN. I will go over those here in a little bit. 8 of them are human, 8 of them are non-human. And the non-human classes they advance more slowly, they're a little more powerful, and they're very unusual in the world. So they come from, they're meant to be something alien, kind of like playing a Vulcan in Star Trek. It's something very different. You have to get into the role. It's a whole different kind of race. Some of those, the alienness and the foreignness of races that was present in AD&D, like you're playing a gray elf. If you read the gray elf description, they're hundreds of even 1,000 years old. Just a very different kind of race, and those were kind of watered down in the later editions of D&D, and they lost their special and interesting perspective, I think. The 5 attributes are strength, constitution, agility, charisma, and intellect. Very similar to D&D, except that wisdom has been folded into charisma and intellect. The parts of wisdom that are like intuition, willpower, and then also the charm is coming into charisma. Intellect is more a matter of knowledge and cunning, and the mind. Charisma is more the will, and it creates a little clearer distinction from lots of playtesting and design. This worked really well, and it gives more clarity. It's always kind of tricky to figure out whether you should use intelligence or wisdom. RIN kind of simplifies that. Each class possesses several features, which are signature abilities. So classes have their attributes range, then they have features, which are signature to them, then they have proficiencies. Proficiencies are unique skills. So each class has a set of specialized skills that are unique to it, though some classes share a few. These include the Grey Elf, Necromancers, and Thrall, and the Wizard's Arcane Lore. So for generic skill checks like a strength check or a constitution, agility check to dodge out of the way or jump, acrobatics, strength check to perform some feat of strength, intellect check to recall a piece of lore, decipher a script or something. Those are there's no like long skill system like in 3rd edition, 5th edition, that kind of stuff. That's all just an attribute check. But then proficiencies are, you can only do them if you have the proficiency. So to use the enthrall ability, you have to have it. And things like arcane lore, it's not just knowledge about magic, it's the ability to interact with magical things, activate magic tool devices. So it's unique arcane lore. It's not just something that a barbarian or thief would even have a chance to know. And so that gives a it works really well because the proficiencies provide really specialized things, and it's kind of clear. And then for anything that is just kind of generic are the attribute checks. Then the features are just their own unique thing. Each attribute, feature, and proficiency has a percentile, which is a number ranging from 1 to 100, which determines how powerful it is. All attributes and proficiencies and many features also have a rating determined by percentile, which is a number mostly ranging from -3 to +3, from awful to excellent. And then when you have your percentile, you can distribute that percentile in certain features into sub-features. So even though you might have, let's say the barbarian might have like they both have 80 mights, those sub-features in the might have been spent differently, so they make a very different barbarian. And other features apply the same way. With the bard sword play, you might have a 50 in your sword play, but very different bards because you picked very different sets of sword play skills. And then checks. During adventures, situations arise that test the attributes and proficiencies of characters, such as a test of strength to kick in a door, a test of alchemy to brew an elixir. Such tests are called checks. Check is made by rolling a d10 and adding the attributes or proficiencies rating, then comparing it to the difficulty of the task. If the result is equal to or higher than the D, then the check succeeds. A standard check requires the result of 6 or higher to succeed, while more difficult checks range upward, normally up to 12. That's a guideline. There are, but in general, 1 through 5 is failure, 6 through 12, or 6 or higher is a success, and then it just scales, one way or the other depending on the situation. So you're really rolling a d10, adding a modifier, and seeing if it's successful or not. Find the d10 works really well. It's a little simpler to use and easier than the d20. A lot of people don't have issues with math, but for some people, adding a 17 and adding a 14, 30, it's challenging. The numbers are more truncated. Also, the bonuses mean a little bit more. Plus ones are twice as valuable and such. So it worked really well, and it's definitely good for people who don't have some issues with math, but just in general, it's just simpler really for everybody, including myself. I'm decent at math, but it's a really nice way of doing it. The D20 is a great system. I love the D20, but I think the D10 definitely adds some things. Criticals and fumbles, and that's just where you roll a 10. It's a critical, you roll a 1. It's a fumble. So they're 10% of the time you're fumbling, 10% of the time you're doing a critical. And it makes it a little more action-packed because it's happening twice as often. Um, and then I will start hitting on the art. The art in RIN is part of the booklet, so you get in the printed book, you'll get the print. It's very vibrant pulp fantasy art, and it's meant to be very beautiful. And part of the experience is the art itself. Is spend a lot of time on it. It is AI generated, but there is kind of an art form to generating this stuff the way you want it to be. And the pages, not just the one page, but the page spread. As you open up the book, they have a set. It's meant to be worked together thematically, and I'll show that when we get into the character classes, especially. But yeah, this is just basically kind of a beautiful, even angelic, fae type creature, and that's what it is. On the other page is the character creation and advancement. One of the things I'll say is RIN. It's going to be about 50 pages projected to be, but it's very dense and it's very, tightly put together. So there's a lot of content in here for 50 pages, which is something I think that stands out. So character creation, advancement, concept, and mechanic. This just discusses basically for people making a character, you have the mechanic and the conceptual element, motivations, morals, fears, appearance, that kind of stuff. And then you have the mechanic and how that underlies and connects. And people build differently. Some people are strictly gamists. They just want to build a mechanically effective character and they don't really care about the role playing. Other people, it's all about the role playing. Usually there's a mix in between, here and there. And then you choose your class. You have the 8 human classes: Barbarian, Bard, Mage, Paladin, Ranger, Thief, Warrior, and Wizard, and then the expanded classes, all of which are non-human: Centaur, Knight, Grey Elf, Necromancer, Halfling, Burglar, High Elf, Priest, Hill Dwarf, Scoundrel, Lizard Man, Shaman, Sea Elf, Swashbuckler, Wood Elf, Druid. As humans represent most of the world's population and control the most territory, standard class adventurers are much more common and fit better into the world, while expanded class adventurers belong to more monolithic cultures and hail from secluded regions that seem alien to the human world, and while more powerful overall, advance more slowly in level. It's kind of like how I'm really getting from the AD&D, where thieves, progress very quickly, wizards slowly. It makes kind of a more of a dynamism, and it's kind of fun. You might be a level ahead or 2 levels ahead, just to make you a little more powerful to start with. So it's just kind of, variety there. The barbarian is a fierce warrior of the waste, gigantic in melancholy and mirth. The bard is a wandering minstrel, steeped in cunning and intrigue, fortune and glory. The mage is a sorcerer, spell sword adept in the magic of battle. The paladin is a warrior priest, a seer into the mysteries of the gods. The ranger is a wilderness guide, skilled in archery and the felling of beasts. The thief is an expert in criminal undertakings, blades, stealth, and subterfuge. The warrior is a master of weapons and tactics. The wizard is a magic user versed in the arcane. Those are the standard, and then the expanded. The centaur knight is an equine fighter skilled with bow and blade. All of these expanded classes are kind of filling niches and in very, I think, interesting ways, because I always wanted the knight in shining armor. The issue with that is just having a mount. There's so many situations where if you are a knight and your main thing is a horse, it's very limiting in a lot of games. This, you are the knight, you are the horse. So you have that cool idea of being a mount, and then you also have all the neat mythological elements of the centaur in there. So when you mix the race with a concept like a knight that's a little bit limited, it fills out, kind of fills in the holes on the knight, because it's a very, very specific archetype, maybe a little bit too tight and limiting to be a whole class. But when you bring the knight in there, it adds a lot of cool elements, the healing elements of like Chiron, the archery elements. So it works really well. Of Gray Elf Necromancer is a practitioner in grim and profane death magic. Again, Necromancy is really cool, just limiting the wizard spells that any wizard can get, but the Necromancer is better at them. But you also throw in some kind of otherworldly Grey Elven magic, and it's very interesting. Another thing about the elves in RIN, conceptually, elves, their appearance they're tied to the natural world in a very vivid way. So when the elves, the environment they live in changes their appearance. So gray elves living in subterranean areas, they become dark. Their skin changes. They have like maybe the look of the Underdark. Whereas a high elf priest, or let's say a sea elf living by the sea, they actually begin to take on bright blue eyes, kind of the look of the colors of the sea, maybe coral colored hair. And the wood elves take on like green, the appearance of the wood. So if you're a desert elf, it's kind of neat that they take on they're tied to the natural world. So if their civilizations have as they've grown in these areas, they actually look different, and that's kind of a unique, an otherworldly element of the RIN elves, which is kind of Tolkienian. They were kind of based on the dawn and the dusk. The appearance of the elves were the dawn and the dusk, more or less, and the stars and such, the moon, and just took that a little bit further with RIN. That um, just kind of it's kind of a neat thing, a neat element. If you're a sea elf and you've got blue hair and you've got coral colored skin and you've got it's kind of fun. So next is the Halfling Burglar. He's a lucky trickster dabbling in magic and larceny. So this is basically kind of taken from the fighter mage, or sorry, the thief mage of AD&D. You throw the halfling in there, and it's just a really cool concept when you take that archetype of kind of mage thief, and then but put in the halfling race. It adds a lot of cool elements. The High Elf Priest is an otherworldly arcanist of fair and noble lineage. This is kind of like the most fair and the most otherworldly of all the elves, the high elves, very beautiful, um, radiant, glowing creatures, um, and having some kind of holy elements to them just through their race, a kind of semi-celestial almost. And then, the also having these powerful arcane abilities, kind of like a mage priest if you're looking in the AD&D setting, kind of the best of both worlds, but also some limitations because of that in other ways. But again, if this is kind of like Feanor, Glorfindel, these very, powerful, potent creatures that you can kind of play as, or even, so you could look at the Maiar, they're similar kind of ideas in Tolkien's setup, just very different. Hildur Scoundrel is a durable craftsman and able fighter thief, and he is basically take a fighter thief, which I always thought was the coolest dwarf class of fighter thief in AD&D. You're just taking those elements of a fighter and a thief, and then putting the dwarf in there, dwarven culture. It adds a cool concept. Lizardman Shaman is a shape-changing magician able to assume a fair form. So he's actually this hideous lizard man, but he can take a fair form as like a beautiful maiden or just some hunky adventure and kind of sweet. So he's the one kind of dual elements. He can actually shape change. And he, of course, you could always make it the other way where he's actually this beautiful enchantress, but can just take a fair form, so you could invert it, or who knows what his form is. Maybe something altogether different, but he has these two forms he operates in. So actually leads to some really fun role-playing interactions, where you just got these two sides of yourself, almost like kind of like a lycanthrope, where you're a werewolf, but then you're, same kind of transformation. Really, my players have had a lot of fun with it. Sea Elf Swashbuckler is a Grandmaster swordsman with enchanted song. So he is the swords, the bard is also a swordsman. He's a swashbuckler, but he has a whole different element to him. He also has the elf song, the song ability. So they're similar in that way, but they function very differently. The Sea Elf Swashbuckler is primarily a swashbuckler, but he has some powerful elven songs. So it's a different take on the bard, really. It's just much more swashbuckler, but really, really fun and cool, cool element. He also has a very powerful acrobatics ability. He can perform these amazing feats of acrobatics, which make him different. The Wood Elf Druid is a forest dweller with power over nature and its elements. So they have very powerful elemental magic, and then just base elements. And then they have this unique nature magic. The Druid class took the longest to develop. I did a bunch of different versions of it, but this one worked out to actually function really well. And again, we tie in the wood elf element to it as well, just adds an additional thing. Um, and again, there are a lot of other class ideas you can have. A lot of obviously you could have other there have halflings that do other things. You have hill dwarves that do other things. But for the purpose of adventuring, the purpose of playing the game, these function really well. And all right, then you have creation methods. They're basically three types: the adventure, the heroic, the narrative. I recommend the adventure is definitely the recommended form. Generates less power, or recommended method. Generates less powerful, more customizable characters. This is the most balanced and recommended method. Hero generates more powerful but less customizable characters, often resulting in large power differences between them. So depending how you roll, it can be massively different, and that can be fun if you enjoy the disparity. Sometimes it's fun to be the kind of the weak character in the party, and you have these other heroes you're kind of working with. Definitely not recommended. It's just more very a niche kind of thing. Narrative method is just kind of where the GM and you discuss the concept and you make the stats accordingly. You might have some random elements, kind of for professional role players. If you have, okay, I want to play the barbarian with really massive might, and you can just customize it. And same, so the attributes, how you do that with the adventure, you roll 5 percentiles, that's D100s, 1 to 100. You have the results, rounding down, and assign them as you wish. So you roll a 90, you get a 45. It gives you a lot of room to grow as you level. Heroic, you keep the full percentile, but they're all in order. So again, you might be the fighter with a 98 intellect, kind of a different thing. You might be the wizard with the 98 strength or something. And also it makes it just for very powerful and randomized characters. You could be a necromancer that rolls a 99 on his death magic and his forbidden knowledge or something. He has these absurd abilities. So that's just for those really, really random, one-off adventures, or just it's a different way of playing the game, really. Then again, the narrative is just a mixture there. Then the features, you take the number of features, you roll percentiles, cut them in half, and assign them as desired. The hero, you just take them as is, but again, you could roll, you only have 2 features, let's say. I mean, the wizard could get a 98 on his power and a 96 on his knowledge. You just have this absurd character right from the beginning, which is all right. And you could roll a 3 or a 2. So it's very different. And then proficiencies, same thing. You assign them as you wish. You roll them and assign them, cut them in half, the percentiles, and assign them as you wish, or you take the full amount, or you do the narrative method. And there's also something I call the peasant method, where you round down and take them in order, or kind of a really old school method. And then you have like the superhero method, where you take the full percentile and you put them whatever order you want. But again, you're going to be so overpowered at that point, depending on how you roll. It's a very niche kind of thing. Definitely recommend the adventure method. If you're experienced role player, you might want to put the narrative method. Then the rule of natural 100. If during character creation you roll 100, you can either push the max rating above where it should be by 1, or give some other unique ability. I often give them like a really nice magic weapon. Some other, we'll discuss narratively, like why your character rolled 100 on his constitution. Tell him what's his special thing. What does he have? What is he? Why is he this way? Why? What you're. So it's just something to do, to keep in mind. Okay, then generating belongings. RIN doesn't keep track. Doesn't like rope, torches, rations, water skins. It's not really a survivalist game. I know there are a lot of games like that, and that's fine. You could play it that way if you wish to. You can have strict comments rules. It's not hard to, but I don't really keep track of that. It's all to the DM to kind of decide. But it's not really the tone of RIN is keeping track of how many bottles of water you have or how many rolls of toilet paper. It's torches. Doesn't fit the tone of what I want for RIN. But you could change it that it would do it that way if you want to keep track of that stuff. Also, optional rules for starting magic items are included on page 19. I always give optional magic items. It's very fun. When nephew rolled the bow veil, he rolled a rare 1 in 100 on his treasure roll, and he got the bow of the Elven King as a ranger, and he rolled a terrible ranger, but the bow just made him overpowered. Again, really up to the GM how you want to do that. But yeah, I recommend the starting treasure. It's fun. You might start with another one. Um, my wife had an endless ointment of light. Sounds worthless because she rolled like 1 in 100, and then we rolled again, and it was the ointment of light. So normally it's a single use, and for the 1 in 100 I just made it's endless. You can just infinitely produce light. And she ended up trading it off to a creature in exchange for something. But it was just fun, fun stuff. And then combat statistics, I'm not going to get a whole lot into that, but you basically have awareness, initiative, stealth, armor rating, attack, defend, and damage. And a stat called pathfinding, which is used for just traveling the wilderness and determining on what grounds an encounter happens, either favorably or disfavorably, based on your skill in traversing the wild. Awareness is just your ability to spot a hidden monster if they're hiding. Initiative is a check you make against the monster, and if you beat their initiative rating, then you get to act first. Stealth, again, if you're sneaking around past the monster. Armor rating reduces damage taken in. Your attack is just your attack roll. Defend is your roll to defend. In RIN, you actively attack and actively defend. The monsters don't attack you, like you don't have an AC that they attack. When the monster attacks you, you defend against its threat. If you so it's all on the players. I think it makes it a little more cinematic, a little more player centered, and the damage is just rolled pretty much roll the dice and add it up. Backgrounds are something that are just elements. They're too numerous. I list some examples, but they give bonuses from +2 to +4 based on the GM in certain circumstances, and to pathfinding when you're familiar with the region. So again, you could take the acolyte background. You're going to get bonuses as priests, shrines, and the religious. So you're interacting with the priest, you'll get anywhere from +2 to +4 because of your background. Criminal contacts, bonuses with thieves and underworld figures. There's a million of them. You can be from a certain area. Obviously it's convenient if you're starting in a desert area. I'm from this area, so you'll get bonuses. There's a million of them. It's just between you and the DM to determine them. You can be more you could grant you more. You could have some more extraordinary ones. It's really just 3 elements I find work well. And it is ultimately optional, but I encourage it. So just summary of character creation: you select your class, generate the attributes, generate the features, generate the proficiencies, generate the belongings, calculate your combat statistics and pathfinding, and then optional is choose a background. Then advancing in level. For defeating monsters and completing quests, the character gains experience points. When he attains a certain amount, he advances in level. The rules for leveling are included in each class's respective section, generally, because each class levels a little differently. Generally, the GM gives out experience ranging from 10 to 100 points at a time to each character when a quest or objective is completed by the party, though more difficult or longer quests may grant more. While monsters themselves do not have set experience point values, defeating them may also be treated as a kind of quest and therefore grant experience according to the GM's discretion. I had in mind an XP value for monsters just in themselves, but ultimately, for many reasons, which is a long discussion points in RPGs why monsters should or shouldn't give XP, I determined not to give them set amounts. But you could just say we defeated a group of monsters that's worth 10 XP because you fought your way through the swamps, and along the way, it's the danger of the swamps, and you defeated monsters, and anyways, and then the classes level up to the next level. For standard classes, it's the square of your current level. So 100, 400, 900, 1600, 2500. And then expanded classes is twice as much. So generally, you're going to be at least one level behind. Well, you start off at first, but then you're going to level more quickly, and you'll be a level or 2 behind. So again, the expanded classes are more powerful, but they advance more slowly. And then RIN really maxes out at 10th level. That's always the tone that I like. I think it covers a lot. And RIN probably a level is maybe like a level and a half in D&D, something around that. So maybe in D&D you'd see it like maxing out at maybe 12th to 15th level equivalent. But past that, it does kind of max out. And if you want, you could continue onwards. If the system becomes interested, if people become interested in that, I can come up. I have some ideas for expanded rules and maximize things, but it's not right now. It's just the system would first they'd have to be interested in it for me to do that. And then you see the art there is kind of evocative. If you compare it to the system rules, you know, you have this beautiful otherworldly creature. On the other side, you have these adventurers looking on. You know, you could take it as they're looking on toward her or toward, you know, adventure in general, or, you know, they're just kind of young adventurers. This kind of, you know, handsome young man and this beautiful young girl, warriors, or who knows what they are, but they're just starting and they're getting ready to adventure. So it kind of captures that, and the art in RIN is really thought out to match thematically what's going on the page. So it is kind of an art book as well as a system, and that's pretty much what I'm going to do for the first video, and that's a little introduction to the first few pages in cover.